Hello students, welcome back to our discussion of Chapter 6. We just discussed tariffs. We're going to subsidies. Subsidies, as you see there, it's the government payment to our domestic producers. They can be in the form of those items listed there: cash grants, low interest loans, tax breaks, or government equity participation. Basically, subsidy revenues is money generated from taxes. Of course, subsidies also, research has shown, encourage overproduction because you are able to get that subsidy so you can produce more. Creates inefficiencies, reduces trade, but it does protect our domestic producers. There is evidence as well that many subsidies are not that successful at increasing international competitiveness for the domestic producer. There are significant global subsidies in agriculture. I'm going to look at a slide or some information, a data piece I should say, in right here. Google document. I'll make this available as well. This is agricultural subsidies for selected countries. The light blue numbers, 1995 to 1997. The dark blue numbers, about 25 years later, 2009, 2011. You can see that agricultural subsidies in some countries, Norway, Switzerland, quite high. Even 10 years ago, 2009, 2011, they were 55 to 60%. Canada, they have decreased as well, maybe by a smidgen of a percent. Most countries have had their agricultural subsidies come down. We'll talk about this later on in terms of one of the needs for the World Trade Organization is to try to reduce agricultural subsidies. Some argue that in some countries are needed. Some argue against it, saying that it just creates an unfair playing field for all concerned. Let's go back to our notes here, current slide. Of course, with subsidies, they greatly benefit the domestic producer, the domestic consumer. They're the ones paying the price because of the money used for the subsidies is tax dollars. Import quotas as the third one, and voluntary export restraints as the fourth one. Import quotas, basically they restrict the quantity of some good that can be imported into the country. There's different types of import quotas that we don't need to get into. Interesting enough, for example, as it says there, the United States has a quota on cheese imports. Let's look at a slide showing that. Here it is. This website is called the CIA.org. It's Cheese Importers Association of America. Basically going through, you get that nice president's message. You get into some members only information. Basically, this is the United States one. They restrict the countries that can import cheese into that country. And it's if you have some time, go through it, because it does showcase lots of the processes and the criteria that countries have to meet, and that there is a limited quota on imported cheese products into the U.S. Canada has something similar with dairy farming. We'll look at that later on as well. But the dairy industry is subsidized, in Canada, and there's various quotas placed on where and how much can be imported and how much even within Canada can be produced by different dairy farms. Different provinces have different amounts that they can supply into Canada. At one time, I'm not sure if it's the same right now, but Quebec had the largest quota for Canada in terms of being able to supply dairy products into Canada. That's why, compared to the prices in the States, dairy prices in Canada is quite high. If you've ever traveled into the States and looked at some of their dairy prices, they're less than half the price, far less than half the price for what we pay up here. Voluntary export restraints. These are basically quotas on trades imposed by the exporting country. So it's not, it's a voluntary agreement generally in order to keep peace between two countries. They will set up some type of voluntary export restraint. We'll look at these VERs later on as well. But they, instead of the U.S. setting up an import quota for cheese, or Canada setting up an import quota for dairy products, countries who export their product, who are trying to import into Canada, for example, would have this voluntary export restraint. Generally, they do this to keep the peace between nations. Japan and the U.S. did this with automobiles, and we can discuss that example later on in this chapter as well. But that is the big benefit. The big reason they do this is it's voluntary, and if they don't obey it, then it's going to go into the more of a involuntary or forced import quota system. Local content requirements. It can be expressed as physical terms or value terms. You get the Buy America Act, you get Buy Canada Act. Various countries are going to have a similar act, encouraging the domestic consumers to buy certain products because more of it was made in their country. So that Buy America Act and even the Buy Canadian Act, basically it specifies that government agencies must give preference to local products when putting out contracts for equipment. In Canada, there is a local content requirement for radio and TV. Canadian content, CanCon, basically refers to the CRTC requirements that radio and television must air a certain percentage of content by persons from Canada. We'll be looking at the Trans-Pacific Partnership as well, or the new term for that. Basically, that Trans-Pacific Partnership was going to lower the amount of Canadian content quota requirements in radio and TV as part of the overall partnership between various countries. Administrative policies. This is basically if nothing else works, just apply some type of government rule or administrative requirement which makes it difficult for that country to send products into your host country. Federal Express, this is a good example. As stated there, they've had a tough time expanding into Japan because the customs inspectors in Japan insist on opening a large proportion of packages, express packages, basically to check for pornography. So I'm not sure if they don't have enough pornography in Japan, or they just want to make sure that excess pornography doesn't get into Japan. Not sure. But of course that process will delay the express package for days, sometimes up to weeks, which then makes the customers upset. So they're going to use a different global shipping service. There's other examples as well that we can discuss. Imported tulips from the Netherlands into Japan. They were met with administrative policies. Basically, Japan wanted to check every imported tulip for, I don't know what you would check it for, maybe for bugs or viruses or pornography or something, I don't know. But basically, for them to check every flower, they did it by cutting the tulip bulb. So they would cut it down the middle, and of course, I don't know much about tulips, but I think cutting it down the middle is going to destroy the plant, the flower. So of course, you're not going to, if you're the Netherlands, you're not going to want to send your product in there, because it's basically it's worthless once it gets there. Imported electronics, another example with Japan. Most of my examples are with Japan. Japan does have a history of being more protectionist, and we'll discuss that later as well. But with imported electronics, this is something that actually France was doing to Japan. France required that all shipments from Japan, that they would be inspected at a central location in the middle of France, basically far from the port of entry. So if things are coming in by boat, they would ship them into middle of France to inspect them. Of course, that whole shipment time would take a lot of time and slow down, would put pressure on sales. Canada does this a couple times. Basically, all imported products into Canada must be labeled in French and English. So if you are an American producer and you think, hey, Canadians up north of us would love this product, you now got to have a French label on it, which could slow down the process of getting your product in here. Basically, all of these policies are established to delay the arrival of the product. And if you can delay the arrival of the product, you could be giving more time for your producers to have sales or whatnot. The last one is anti-dumping policies. Basically, this enables firms to unload excess production in foreign markets. Alternately, some dumping, even though it might just be, hey, we have excess products, we want to give it to a developing or undeveloped country, it can have some negative or predatory behavior attached with it. You can dump a product, you can give it to a country below market value, and it could weaken their own rising industries in that product. For example, if that country were to want to develop certain products, and another nation came in here and said, hey, here's some products, we're going to give it to you below market value because they're excess products, it could kill any kind of growing industry in that developing or undeveloped nation. Various countries, this seems to be one of the World Trade Organization's greatest pressures to act upon, is the anti-dumping news, and we can look at some of these articles later on in the chapter as well. So those are the instruments of trade policy. The next video will discuss some of the cases for government intervention.